All right. Did the bell ring? I didn't hear the bell. Did the bell ring? Must have. You're all looking like the bell rung. Acts 23. And let's start with prayer. Gracious Lord, we pray your blessings this day upon our study of your word, to give us your Holy Spirit and understanding, and to help us rightly apply your word in our own lives. For Jesus' sake, amen. All right, Acts 23, we left off at verses 12 and 13. So the recap to bring you up to speed. Paul is at this moment under arrest. He is being held in a Roman garrison, which is connected to the temple via a set of stairs. He has addressed an angry mob that has accused him of things that are not true and trumped up charges against him. They accused him of defiling the temple because they saw him hang around with some guy out on the streets who was not Jewish. And Jewish law forbade any non-Jews from entering the temple. Even though nobody actually saw him in the temple with this guy, they accused him of it because they saw him out on the streets with a guy. They accuse him of, riotous behavior, rallying up mobs, all kinds of horrible things, none of which is true. The Roman soldier who has him does not really understand what's going on, or why the Jews hate him so much. And he has himself violated the law by putting Paul in chains. Roman law, as we looked at last week, strictly prohibits Roman citizens from being restrained with bonds. So this Roman has broken Roman law, and he is himself actually in trouble at this point in time if Paul wanted to get him in trouble. So he's being very polite to Paul and treating Paul very well. So this is kind of where we pick it up now. So verses 12 to 13, chapter 23. And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who formed this conspiracy. All right, the couple of words worth noting. The banded together, the Jews banded together. I kind of like the implication of the Greek word there better, which implies more a twisting together. Sounds more devious. You know, they twisted together, twisted around each other for this plot. And when it says, put themselves under an oath, this is the same word in English that is anathema, to be condemned. It's the word the Roman Catholics use to condemn Lutherans, in fact, that we are anathema for saying you're saved by grace through faith alone. We are condemned to hell. They put themselves under an anathema. Literally, they cursed themselves with this oath, knowing what they were doing, which is even more incredible. So it's not just an oath. It is a self-curse. A self-curse by God, in fact. Human nature being what it is, they've condemned themselves twice. One, they're conspiring to commit murder, which is a violation of the fifth commandment, so they're already, cursed to God for violating the fifth commandment, but now they bind themselves in another curse on top of that curse, so it's like they're doubly cursed if they actually follow through on this. They're only singly cursed, though, if they don't. It's truly a demonic act, and yet it's done in the name of faith, and these people are utterly convinced that they're serving God by doing it. That's what we see in human nature here. You can be 180 degrees opposing God and still be convinced in your mind you're serving God. And this is a prime example of it. These guys who bound themselves to this oath, these were zealots for the Jewish religion. These were guys who were on fire for Yahweh in their minds, serving him with their own lives. And yet, look at how demonic their service really is. Yes, please.
From taking an oath. I'm not talking about an oath in court, but just saying, I swear to God I didn't do it. You say those sort of statements.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, we see something about oath-taking here. Lutherans are not opposed to oaths. We don't say oaths are wrong. There are some oaths we are called upon to make that we would even say are good. The marriage vow is an oath to God and to your spouse. When you're confirmed, you take an oath that you will suffer all, even death, rather than fall away from this confession and faith. In court, when you're called upon to swear, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, that's an oath. So there are oaths that we have no problem taking. However, swearing oaths can be wrongly used when it is done with meaningless things or where there's absolutely no reason to take an oath. So, mom and dad tell you to take the garbage out. You tell them, swear to God, I'll take it out when I get around to it. That's a ridiculous thing to take an oath over, completely meaningless. We should not take foolish or frivolous oaths to anything, swearing to God. And in fact, on the handout here, you've got a citation from Jesus talking about oaths. And I think this is probably even more true in Jewish culture than in ours. Because while people do sometimes do those meaningless swear to God, I'll do it, you very rarely hear that. I think it was probably more prevalent in Jewish culture, where they were taking oaths to things. And so Jesus says this in Matthew 5, I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it's God's throne, nor by earth, for it's his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king, nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black, but let your yes be yes and your no, no, for whatever is more than this is of the devil. So, Jesus spoke specifically against these kinds of oaths like these guys are taking. Now, the way the Quakers and the Amish and other sects have interpreted this is that all oaths are wrong. This is why the Amish refuse to serve in the military, because that would involve an oath to the country that they're not willing to take. And, of course, it takes human life. But there are numerous little groups besides the Amish. Who is it who looks like the Amish but they're not Amish? Mennonite. Thank you. I think the Mennonites too are included in that. But yeah, these little type Quakerish type groups are opposed to any oaths at all, including oaths in court. Of course, ironically, I think they still take marriage vows. Right. Yeah, well, there are vows, interestingly, that Paul does keep. And Paul himself takes, good point, the Nazirite vow. There's 2 times when Paul seems to have taken the vow of the Nazirite. One on his second missionary journey, and then here, before his arrest, he was in the process of fulfilling a Nazirite vow with 4 other men who had taken it, even though he kind of took it spontaneously, and he funded their taking this vow. But a vow to commit to God and be faithful and true, and refrain from any strong drink, and let your hair grow. I have not taken a Nazirite vow. I just need a haircut. And you can't, even if you wanted to. So that's, and these were vows Paul himself kept. And as part of one's religious devotion or whatever, there was nothing sinful or wrong about that either. It was even considered, an act of faithfulness. Yeah, who? Very good at it, though. Felt the only part of that vow he kept was the don't cut your hair part. Anything else? Does that cover what you wanted to cover? All right, thanks for my advanced age. Okay, so on the last asterisk before we move to the next two verses, this was a life or death vow because Paul was being held by a cohort of Roman soldiers who were heavily armed and sworn to protect Roman citizens to the death. To kill Paul while in their custody would have no doubt involved the death of many or all of them. So they could not sneakily assassinate Paul. He was under 24-hour guard by heavily armed Roman soldiers. The Jews were unarmed. They didn't have armor that they wore, or probably the best they could produce for a weapon was just a knife to butcher sheep with. So against Roman soldiers who were the toughest of the tough, this was a death vow. If they had attacked Paul, they would all have been slaughtered. That's how serious they were about killing Paul, how much they hated him. Verses 14 to 15. They came to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him, but we are ready to kill him before he comes near." So it's bad enough they place themselves under this demonic vow to murder. Now they make the chief priest and his gang complicit, which the chief priest seems all too willing to do. Now, again, it's probably the Sadducees they go to here, not the Pharisees. The Sanhedrin was made up of the two groups, as we discussed last time, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Sadducees were the rich, the powerful. They lived in lavish homes. In fact, I showed you a citation from a historian last week who said that out of all the archaeological digs in Jerusalem, without exception, the richest homes that they dug up and have found belong to the Sadducees. So these guys are filthy rich. They're the powerful, politically connected group. The Pharisees were of the people. Paul was a Pharisee. The Pharisees were willing to live with Paul. They didn't have, they may have had some issues with him, but they were okay with Paul, and they wanted to protect him. So I don't think these guys went to the entire Sanhedrin with this plan. I think they just went to the Sadducees, who hated Paul and wanted him dead. So they make the high priest and they make the rest of the Sadducees all complicit now in this plot. They lie to the Romans. Yes?
They were going to keep their hands clean, maybe by hiring professional assassins, or do you think they were willing to carry out the murder with their own hands? What impression do you get here?
My impression is they're going to do it themselves. I don't see anything in the text suggesting that they were going to hire assassins, only that they've bound themselves to this vow to kill Paul. So I would think this was a plot to themselves, and it's being hatched virtually overnight.
So they weren't afraid of being found out.
Right. So they're going to kill him the next day. I don't think that's time enough really to organize hiring assassins. Verse 16. And when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. This is the only mention we have in the New Testament of Paul's extended family, well, other than his dad being a Pharisee. But evidently Paul has a sister and a nephew. And the nephew happens to have been in Jerusalem. And evidently, this nephew he's at least a Jewish believer, don't know if he's Christian or not. But he was rubbing shoulders with people who were aware of the assassination plot, which means either he was rubbing shoulders with the Sadducees or he was rubbing shoulders with the assassins. One of the two. So Paul's nephew was religious enough and zealous enough that he would have been connected and come in contact with these people who were, the most zealous to the point of murder. But he knows right from wrong, and he cares about his uncle, evidently. So interesting. We never hear about him again. We know nothing more about Paul's greater family, but clearly he had one. Verse 20 to 22. Nope, I skipped something. 17 to 19. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, "Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you." Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked him privately, "What is it you have to tell me?" Okay. So the text calls him a young man, and in the mind's eye, at least my mind's eye, I immediately, go to thoughts of this as like some 12-year-old kid or 10-year-old kid or younger even. Actually, the word being used here to describe him implies something a little older. According to, one concordance on this that addresses the word, this is a word typically used of men between ages of 24 and 40. This isn't the young man, by our standards anyway. This is a grown man. And it's weird that this Roman tribune would take him by the hand and lead him to the side. What's going on there? And I think that's just a cultural difference. In our culture, that's weird, for grown men to take each other's hands and go to the side. It's not in every culture. Brian Saunders, our district president, told me of a visit to Kenya, and where they stopped at a restaurant as they were traveling between towns, and the bishop of the Lutheran church in Kenya took him by the hand to lead him into this restaurant, and he pulled his hand away. I don't hold hands with my wife, say nothing about with another man. And the bishop explained to him that this restaurant we're going to is full of Muslims. And if they see a white guy in Africa, they're going to kill you. But my holding your hand when we walk into that restaurant shows all of them you're my white guy. And there's a certain amount of protection afforded you with that. They're not going to hurt you if they know you're with me. So, different cultures mean different things with those things.
So did he take his hand?
Yes, he then allowed him to take his hand and lead him into this restaurant. But yeah, to us it's a weird thing. That was one of the things that struck me when we went to Lithuania for the first times too, seeing these young high school age girls walking around holding each other's hands going everywhere.
London, too.
Yeah, when we went to London, you see that sort of thing. It's perfectly normal in their culture. For us, though, it's not. So I think this is a cultural thing. And it makes a whole lot more sense that this would be a man in his 20s or 30s to have been in a position to overhear an assassination plot than some juvenile boy. What would he have been doing hanging around with guys like that? So at any rate, this is what happens. On the asterisk here, we see Paul's arrest by the Romans still allowed him to receive visitors and to speak with Roman guards who responded favorably with his requests. He's not isolated in a cell and kept in chains. Furthermore, the Roman treats the witness with respect and listens to his story with seriousness. So because Paul is a Roman citizen, they are treating him exceptionally well. He is not being treated like a normal prisoner. And he's allowed to receive guests and talk to them. Yes?
Paul was a Roman citizen.
Yes.
What would the chances be that his sister was a Roman citizen, and that her son would be a Roman citizen?
Probably very good.
So even just that nephew would have been treated with respect, not just like he would a Jew, but like a citizen.
I think the Roman citizen law was both parents were supposed to be Roman citizens if you had citizenship. If she married, she would have been born a citizen by being born in Tarsus, because that city was granted the status of a Roman colony, and anybody born there was considered Roman. And I think that's where Paul probably got his citizenship. So the sister would also have had it. If she married a Jew, however, outside of the city, I don't think the nephew would have been considered a Roman citizen. But if she had married another Roman citizen or somebody from Tarsus, a Jew from Tarsus, then he would have been. So, yeah, it's possible it's possible this young guy is, and that's part of the reason why they're treating him well. I mean, if you're not a Roman, you're a step above a dog to them. They treated you with no respect. They could do whatever they wanted to you. All right, verse 20 through 22. And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him, but do not yield to them. For more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you. Oh, and 22. So the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, tell no one that you have revealed these things to me. This sort of cements for me that this is a grown man talking and not a boy. He says, don't yield to them. I can't imagine a juvenile boy talking to a Roman tribune and telling him, don't yield to them. Commanding him what to do, telling him what to do. So I'm fairly sure this is an older 20s or 30 something year old. The citation here at the bottom of the page, it's a quote from a commentary. The Chiliarch, or the tribune, is obviously glad of the intelligence. His sympathies are clearly with St. Paul personally and against the high priest and his followers. He welcomes an opportunity for showing his zeal for the safekeeping of a Roman citizen and for making a statement of the whole transaction from his own point of view. With true official caution, he treats the communication he has received as confidential and takes his measures accordingly. So yeah, the tribune really is showing himself, even though he's an abject unbeliever, he's showing himself to be a relatively wise guy. And he's handling a very volatile situation very carefully and acting in all seriousness with this. His commandership of the Jerusalem cohort is at stake in this too. If he messes this up, he can lose his job. So there's something of self-preservation involved in his actions as well. But he is treating Paul and this nephew with great respect. 23 to 24. And he called for 2 centurions, saying, prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen, and go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on and bring him safely to Felix the governor. So 2 centurions, each obviously commanded between 60 and 100 men. So there's 200 men, plus 200 spearmen, foot soldiers that threw a javelin-like thing, and then cavalry on top of it. So we're talking a group of like 470 soldiers that he's calling into action. An overwhelming show of support against 40 poorly armed Jewish zealots, 10-to-1 advantage, more than a 10-to-1 advantage against him. So he's, again, acting wisely. They're not going to even try anything when Paul is surrounded by that kind of firepower. This is the first century equivalent of B-2 bombers with bunker busters. There's just nothing they could do against this. The third hour, he calls this, 23 to 24. Provide mouths, bring them safety. He called 2 centurions, 200 spearmen. Oh, yeah, okay, at the third hour of the night. So their night starts at 6 p.m., third hour of the night, 9 p.m. So he's sending them out after dark. They're going to go in the middle of the night. So again, under cover of darkness, the Jews can't see what's going on. It's a very wise move. He knows the plot's going to happen in the morning. Paul's not even going to be in town by the morning. So under cover of darkness, they leave with him. The trip from Jerusalem to Caesarea, misspelled, was about 55 miles as the crow flies, so 75 miles via the roads they had to take. You figure an average walking speed of 3 miles an hour, the trip would have taken a couple of days through mountainous area where ambushes would have been possible. Paul got to ride. They prepared a mount for him, but 200 of those soldiers were walking, fully armed and fully armored. That would have been a tough march through mountains. And they're going to send him to Felix. All right, we know something historically about Felix. His full name is Marcus Antonius Felix, a Roman governor of Judea from 52 to 58 AD. The Roman historian Tacitus calls Felix's behavior tyrannical. He often ordered harsh measures, for example, to suppress riots in Caesarea between Jews and Gentiles. Where he sided with the Gentiles, he sent in his soldiers against the Jews, killed a bunch of them. Felix exercised, as Tacitus says, the royal prerogative in a slavish sense with all manner of cruelties and excesses. He had a reputation for crucifying people he considered rebellious. He was even thought to have used assassins to kill the chief priest, a priest named Jonathan, who followed Ananias and ruled for only 1 year in 58 AD. And supposedly, if you remember, when the Roman tribune in Jerusalem first arrested Paul, he thought Paul was this Egyptian prophet who just a few years previously in Jerusalem, they had an uprising where this guy out of Egypt who claimed to be a prophet with supernatural powers got 4,000 Jews to march out of the walls of Jerusalem. And then he claimed that he could just speak with God's power against the walls of Jerusalem and the walls would collapse. And then these 4,000 Jews were going to march into the Roman-occupied part of Jerusalem and kill all the Romans. So the Egyptian prophet. Felix was the guy stationed in Jerusalem who had to deal with that. And the way he dealt with it was, he found out about what they had planned. He marched into that group of 4,000 Jews with his soldiers, captured about 600 of them. The rest scattered, including the Egyptian prophet that nobody ever saw again. Then the 600 he captured, he crucified all of them. So that's the way he dealt with conflict. He crucified all of them. Jerusalem was lined with crosses as a lesson to everybody else in Jerusalem not to mess with Rome. That's Felix. That's how he dealt with stuff. And this is the guy then that Paul has to be judged by. And then his use of assassins too. He got along with Ananias, the current high priest under Paul, because Ananias was just like he was. murderous, self-serving, self-aggrandizing. The high priest who followed him, Jonathan, was more sympathetic with Jews than with Romans. He didn't even last a year in office, and Felix had him assassinated. So you either sucked up to Felix and played his game, or he killed you. That's the kind of guy he was. 25 to 30. So this is the letter written by the Roman tribune in Jerusalem to Felix. He wrote a letter in the following manner: Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. And when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him worthy of death or chains. And when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. Short, sweet, to the point, and lying from the beginning to the end. Remember, this guy had put Paul in chains before he found out Paul was a Roman. So when he first arrested Paul, he treated him horribly, like a non-Jew, like a non-Roman, I mean. But here, the first thing out of Claudius's mouth, verse 27, is, I rescued him having learned he was a Roman. Not true. He didn't know he was a Roman when he arrested him, and he didn't treat him like a Roman. And then verse 29, but had nothing charged against him worthy of death or chains, except he had put him in chains. So he's covering his own butt with this letter. He's worried about repercussions for how he treated Paul. So he flat out lies to cover himself. Great lesson in human nature again. Things to note about the letter. First of all, one, his name is given, which provides a means to verify the story historically. Proof is always in the details. One of the things Luke, who's writing Acts, is great at are details. For those who would claim the New Testament is a fictional document, just made up, there are so many historically verifiable details in it that you really can't make that claim, including names, dates, the whole works. Festivals. We know this happened around the Pentecost festival of the Jews. We know it happened before 58 AD because that's when Jonathan became high priest, and at this point in time, Ananias is still high priest. We know who the governor was. We know who the Roman tribune was. All of these marvelous little details can verify the historic reliability of Scripture. Point 2. So verse 27 is a barefaced lie designed to remove public disciplinary action against him for having bound Paul before he was aware of his Roman citizenship. That this fact comes first in the letter shows it was his primary concern. The first thing this guy's concerned about is himself, not justice. Verse 29 should be enough to secure Paul's immediate release from Roman custody. So the tribune's assessment is, I found nothing worthy of chains or death. That this is a Jewish matter, shouldn't even involve us Romans. And 4, verse 30 is new information and seems to have been after Paul was sent out at night. It would have been a shrewd way to ensure Paul's safe travel to Caesarea. So the new information is, and by the way, I told the Jews that they need to come to you to make their charges. So after Paul was out in the middle of the night, Claudius goes probably the next morning and tells the Jews, he's gone, you want to deal with him, you go to Felix. Now Paul can't be touched. We never hear what happens to these guys who bound themselves to this oath to kill Paul. Because according to their oath, they should all, at this point, starve to death, because they claimed they would never eat anything till Paul was killed. I'd be willing to bet none of them did. Verse 31. And the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. Antipatris is a city you see on the map, bottom corner. It's a little dot halfway between Jerusalem on the bottom and Caesarea at the top. So it's that little dot. It's in the middle of the mountains. It's about 20 miles as the crow flies to Caesarea. So that first night, all of those Roman soldiers by foot marched in the ballpark between 40 and 50 miles, fully armed. That tells you something about the effectiveness of the Roman soldier. These guys were the tough of the toughest. That's a long march. What we know about this city, a New Testament city occupied the site of the Old Testament Philistine city of Aphek. The new city was built by Herod the Great in 9 BC. He named it Antipatris in honor of his father, Antipater, who had become procurator of Judea under Julius Caesar. The modern name of the ruins is Ras El Ain. You can still go there. The city was a military post on the road between Jerusalem and Caesarea, about 20 miles south of Caesarea. So it's a military post. Makes sense that they would go there. They've got quarters for the military, place to sleep, all of that. Verse 32. The next day they left the horsemen to go on with him and return to the barracks. So all the foot soldiers, 400 of them go back to Jerusalem. The 70 cavalry go with Paul because he's on a mount too. So they ride from here 20 miles, nothing. They make that in a couple hours. And this cavalry then marches into Caesarea with Paul to Felix. Verse 33 to 35. When they came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. And when he understood that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear you when your accusers have come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. All right, so the first thing he does is establish jurisdiction. Felix is governor over the area of Cilicia, which is along the northeastern coast of the Mediterranean. So it's a large geographical area he's the governor over. And he's also going about it as a proper judge should, insisting that the accusers come and make accusation if anything is going to happen with Paul. It has to be legally established, so he has to hear from the accuser. He's not just acting rashly. And he puts Paul up in Herod's praetorium, which was literally a palace built for a king. You see the ruins of it in the upper left corner. That's what's left of it now. You see two artists' rendering of what it probably looked like in Paul's day. That pool in the middle was cut out of the rock. You can still see it in the ruins with a little white dot in the middle of it, south of where you see the square building. So it was a gorgeous place, literally a king's palace. Paul will be, imprisoned in quotation marks here for 2 years. You can see Paul's view when you're on the bottom left-hand corner. This is his view looking out over the ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, I guess, not the ocean. What we know about it, first of all, we'll read through the comments. So far, Felix is conducting himself like a proper judge. He rightly is willing to hear charges from the horse's mouth, so to speak. He has Claudius' assessment of the situation, which would have given Paul a leg up on his accusers and made Felix favorable toward him. And then Herod's Praetorium, literally Herod's palace, lies in two parts. The lower palace, built close to sea level, central framing features a great rock-cut pool. That's the square pool. The upper palace, built on a higher reach of the promontory and on a slightly different orientation, focuses on a large central courtyard paved in compacted crushed stone. So ironic that the best treatment Paul ever experienced is at the hands of the Romans. This was a great place to be imprisoned. And he no doubt had freedom to roam the courts. He probably spent his days, received guests. He could see the sea. He could walk by the pool. This was a pretty decent place to be holed up if you had to be. Which, I don't know, as I read it, it kind of struck me. You see, there's something of the goodness of the Lord. Paul is on his way ultimately to Rome to be executed. These are his final days. And God in his grace allowed Paul to spend a great deal of those final days in a place that was pretty easy to stay in. Like being put up in a suite in the Marriott. Better than that. These are king's quarters. So God allowed him a certain respite from the years of getting the snot beat out of him he suffered prior to this, and the ultimate execution he'll face at Nero's hand. So God does, give him a break from it all and allow him to have a couple of years of relative peace. Although knowing Paul, as we do from the New Testament, I have no doubt he would much rather have been out there being beat up and speaking the gospel than he would sitting in a rich place like this.
Pastor?
Yeah.
Would he have had any of his writers or anybody with him that he could have wrote letters or anything?
Yes. Actually, probably so. Do you know off the top of your head which letters were written at this point in time? I don't. Yeah. So he would have written several things, several of the New Testament documents we have. Maybe Hebrews, I think that was a later writing maybe, if Paul wrote Hebrews. But this would have been a time to collect his thoughts and have secretaries come and issue letters all over the place. He would have had lots of visitors. Anything else? All right, just a little bit more. Verse 1, chapter 24. Now after 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, came down with the elders, and a certain orator named Tertullius. These gave evidence to the governor against Paul. All right, now these are the biggest guns in Israel. These are the guys with the most authority. It's like getting a visit from the president. Ananias is the high priest. There is no higher authority than him. And they hire the best lawyer they can get. They call him an orator. That's a lawyer. Here on the handout here, the public speaker. So Strong's Greek Concordance designates the professional public speaker or forensic orator of the Greco-Roman world. Such a figure commonly retained to present civil or criminal cases, blended mastery of language with legal expertise. In Roman provincial courts, Jewish leaders sometimes hired these specialists both for their persuasive skill and for their familiarity with imperial procedures. His Greek name suggests that either he was a Greek Jew or a Gentile hired by the Jews. This isn't just a lawyer, this is a trial lawyer. There is a big difference between a lawyer and a trial lawyer. Trial lawyers are the smooth talkers. I've witnessed this, or heard of this. There was a case in Iowa, in a Lutheran church, where one of the pastors of the congregation was being unjustly accused of things by by more than certain, by a lot of his congregation, because they didn't like him, because he was conservative and they didn't want to be conservative. So they were trying to find all these charges against him to get him out of the ministry so they could get in the liberal guy they wanted to get in. One of those members against him was a trial lawyer. And at the time, I was a vice president in the district. And the district president went to this meeting, and he told me about it, and said he talked first, that the district president talked first, and had these people convinced that doctrinally, they should not do this because they weren't right, that he hadn't done anything wrong worthy of being removed from office. They just didn't like him, and that wasn't the reason. So the district president had the congregation convinced to back off and behave. Then the trial lawyer spoke. And he said you could just see the people turn the switch and change 180 degrees. And that trial lawyer, he said, stood up and started pacing around and started talking in almost a Western drawl, like he was one of the common people and he was one with them, and just totally schmoozed them back to the way he wanted things to go. That's a trial lawyer. That's what they hire against Paul, one of these guys. And you can see it immediately when the guy starts talking, what kind of a slimeball he is. Verses 2 and 3. And when he was called upon, Tertullius began his accusation, saying, "Seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity, being brought to this nation by your foresight, we accept it always and in all places, most notable Felix, with all thankfulness." Buttering up Felix, flattering him shamelessly. "Oh, we enjoy great peace and prosperity by you, you wonderful governor. We're so thankful you're the governor." It makes you want to vomit, that kind of flattery. It's just grotesque, but it's the way the world works. The tactic of all good lawyers, to get on the good side of the judge and the jury. And he's saying this, he's flattering him about the peace and prosperity and how wonderful it is, saying this to a guy who crucified several hundred Jews outside Jerusalem less than a decade earlier. This guy's a monster, and he's flattering him like this. The Greek verse 4, nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear by your courtesy a few words from us. The Greek text literally reads, but in order that I should not be a hindrance to you any longer, I implore you to hear us briefly by your equitable kindness. The false humility, that I shouldn't be a hindrance to you. The inflated flattery, your equitable kindness, it's just the worst of all things, the way you butter up someone like this. It's shameless. Equitable kindness, gentleness, forbearance, clemency, kindness. It's a compound word from the Greek, from epi meaning on, intensifying eikos, which means reasonable or fair, equitable, beyond justice, a sweet reasonableness. Again, this is such inflated language by a high-paid schmoozer. They're pulling out all the stops they can against Paul. Last verse we'll look at. 5. For we have found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among the Jews, throughout the world, a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Another move of a good trial lawyer. utterly dehumanizes Paul. We're not even talking about another human being. We're talking about a plague. A plague on the entire world, no less. He's raised dissensions among the Jews throughout the world. What a monster Paul is. So the wordsmith moves from flattery to painting his opponent as evil incarnate. Not a man, but a plague. And the Greek word there is pestilence. Even more disgusting than a mere plague. A creator of dissension throughout the worldwide Jewish community. And the head of a sect, nonetheless. Note that insurrection, he's accusing Paul of causing, would remind Felix immediately of the insurrection he put down in Jerusalem with this Egyptian prophet. So he's trying to paint Paul with the same brush as this Egyptian prophet that Felix knew about. And the lawyer knew Felix knew about it and had been the one to put it down. So he's trying to, make in Felix's mind this equation with this previous case Felix dealt with. It's a brilliant move by a trial lawyer. The lawyer is purposely painting Paul to be the same kind of man as this Egyptian prophet. Calls him a leader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Also an interesting turn of phrase. That was no mistake. This guy was careful with his words. He knew what he was saying. What he's doing is purposely avoiding the two Christian names Christians went by. Christians were known as the Way, and Christians were also called Christians by this point in history. This lawyer was a smart guy. He would have known both those things. The problem with these names that the Christians were calling them is the Jews didn't like the names because the name Christian implied Christ. Christ was a Jewish term that meant the anointed one. It meant their Messiah. So by calling Christians Christians, you are giving credence to them that their follower was the Messiah. So they purposely avoided the name Christian. And they also avoided the name the Way because it meant that the Christian way was the only way to eternal life. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. There's no other path to the Father except through me. So he's purposely avoiding the names Christians were known by because they were pregnant words. They were full of meaning that the Jews didn't like. So he calls them the sect of the Nazarenes. There's a word without baggage. Paul's going to turn that around when he gets his turn. But this is what Paul is up against. We're going to stop here. It's one man against literally a group of the best political leaders in Jerusalem with the highest paid trial lawyer they could find. Against one guy. It would have been intimidating to say the least. All right, let's close with prayer. Gracious Lord, you do call upon us at times to bear witness of you in this world, even against those where it seems hopeless. We pray that you give us the words to speak at the proper time, and that you build us up in our witness that we might truly bear witness of you in an evil world and call to mind your grace and goodness in a world that rejects it. Grant us this for Jesus' sake. Amen.